Recently, I've been feeling nostalgic about 2016 K-pop, as I'm sure most fans are, considering 2016 is generally looked upon as one of the best years in K-pop. TWICE released TT, EXO released Monster, BTS released Blood, Sweat and Tears, and Blackpink debuted. I can't believe this all happened in the same year, it's insane. But below the soon-to-be big acts in K-pop was a new phenomenon amongst the girl groups in which every company was asking themselves, how do we make our own TWICE? This might sound silly or like I pulled it out of nowhere, but it's actually not far-fetched at all and makes a lot of sense when we look back at the third generation. Keep in mind, many lesser known companies look to the big three for trends to follow. In my opinion, it's better to try and create something different from the bigger groups than to just try to remake what everyone else is doing. Perfect example of this would probably be Dreamcatcher. At first they were Minx and tried to do that Girls' Generation, Girls' Day and Sistar style. But once they became Dreamcatcher, everything changed for them. But anyways, back to how this all relates to TWICE. So TWICE debuted in 2015, and while still majorly popular when debuting, their real dominance in the K-pop industry was felt from the years 2016 to 2018. This does not mean TWICE aren't still dominating, especially since they're selling more albums than they ever did during this time frame. What it does mean is that TWICE had established a certain flavor of cute concept. While it was partly inspired by the girl groups that came before them, it was something unique to them and it had its own flavor. Also remember how many members TWICE have, alongside how TWICE were pretty much the first K-pop group to actually prove that having a foreign idol lineup could be successful and popularized bringing non-Koreans into K-pop groups. And I'm not saying TWICE invented that, I'm saying they made it popular and they showed how successful it could be. At the time TWICE were being crowned as the new nation's girl group, it was the rise of Produce 101 with the debut of IOI and the subsequent disbandment of IOI. I think TWICE in general were very influential to the IOI universe, as I call it, because the group got their biggest hit with Very Very, a song that was intended for TWICE that visually followed in the footsteps of TWICE. Now that TWICE were one of the biggest girl groups in K-pop, it made sense that those within the industry would try and use aspects of TWICE's formula to ensure they were up to date on trends. In particular, what companies looked to replicate was TWICE's success as a girl group with a big lineup. They also looked to TWICE's cuter style at the time and came to the conclusion that if they incorporated these things, they'd find success with their own groups. The post-IOI groups such as Pristin, Gugudan and Weki Meki all followed the trend of having a larger lineup, which had been on trend due to the massive success of TWICE. Pristin and Gugudan in particular both had comebacks reminiscent of TWICE's cute concept like Girls Like Me and Wee Wee. With the styling song and music video, could easily imagine it being a TWICE song released in 2017. Weki Meki were unlucky because they may have used the TWICE blueprint when forming the group, but they didn't try to release music that was similar to TWICE in any way. They done Teen Crush, which was newer at the time and could have made them really famous, but again because the company looked to TWICE to follow the trends, the group's lineup was way too big and turned people off when they only cared about 2 members. They could have been ITZY if they scaled down the lineup. In this case, many post-IOI groups were at an advantage. They had already famous members, and this made companies think that they could easily peddle a new group by not even coming up with a unique concept or style for their new group. It's no coincidence that the only successful group with a post-IOI member in it is Cosmic Girls, who had their own identity and concept that drew in fans who didn't even know about Yeonjung being in IOI. But even then, they were at their worst when they tried to follow the trends TWICE set when they released Happy. I love that song. Maybe that's an unpopular opinion, just like I love Cosmic Girls' debut. Everyone says that's one of the worst debuts, I don't know why. But it's obvious that once Cosmic Girls stepped away from trying to do what was a proven success in the industry by the big three, they became pioneers of the elegant space concept and had more success leaning into that. The problem with trying to make your own TWICE out of famous members and members the public haven't seen is that Twice never had such dynamic. When they debuted, every member was on equal footing compared to post-IOI groups who had 2 famous faces and a majority of unknown idols. There were also other groups that weren't in IOI but still tried to do something that was clearly in the same vein as Twice. Even CLC's later Cute stuff was clearly an attempt at trying to appeal to the Cute concept, which was still on trend because of Twice. April as well, who had their song Mayday, which reminded me a lot of both TT and Signal. And I guess now is the time to state that I'm not claiming these groups are plagiarizing Twice. I'm just explaining how they were inspired by Twice. It's more so that they were in response to Twice. They're taking bits and pieces that they saw that Twice were doing that made them successful, and they're incorporating it. As I said, companies are following trends and Twice were the trend. I think Daya was already a bigger group before the rise of Twice, and yet they never tried to set themselves apart from G-Friend or Twice and relied heavily on Chaeyeon carrying Daya's success. Even if they did try to branch out the other members, they were all going to be crushed under the weight of Chaeyeon's popularity. If you're wondering why post-IOI groups who tried to do something reminiscent of Twice were unsuccessful or ended up disbanding, it's because, as I quickly mentioned earlier, big lineups do not mesh well with post-survival show groups. All the time people ask, how come the post-IOI members are slaying in their new groups with planned all kills and huge exposure? And the real answer is that post-IOI groups are debuting at a perfect time, coinciding with the trends for such groups with famous survival show members who are at the top of the industry at this point. Twice is still majorly successful, but they've changed and become versatile. You can't just pinpoint one thing about Twice that makes them consistent anymore. They've done so many things, they've changed up. So, okay, who are these companies looking to replicate these days? I found ITZY, Blackpink, and aespa are probably the biggest for the new upcoming groups. It works very well considering these are all smaller groups of 4 and 5, which is a perfect trend for what a post-survival show group needs. Another reason for the new trend of smaller groups in the 4th gen is that it's a direct response to the influx of larger group members inspired by Twice in the 3rd gen who all failed miserably, which killed the trend entirely. This, and also the fact that Les Seraphim and IVE have their own flavour of concept, which is a great improvement on the post-IOI disaster, because they aren't just directly putting out music that another huge group could release. Also, let's quickly discuss what in the world post-IOI group comebacks were. Daya with Mr. Potter. Do you see a song called Mr. Potter topping Melon? Let's ask ourselves the serious questions, okay? Overall, a lot of companies didn't realize that trying to follow the wave instead of making our own wave would eventually squander their investments. In general, Twice and Blackpink have so many groups that followed in their footsteps, as companies are hell-bent on making something similar to what they did to get success. The problem with following the trends set by the big 3 and hoping you'll make something just as successful is that most people look to Twice or Blackpink for that style you're trying to replicate. So why would they come to your group? Well, yes, I don't think it's wrong to try and follow what the other big groups do, because sometimes that can keep you relevant if you do something a lot of people want. But at the end of the day, it's not wrong, but it is lazy. If you are a mid-tier company with a decent amount of money, especially with enough money and connections to rig someone into a group, then you have no excuse for making your new girl group come back with concepts and songs that only exist to capitalize on whatever is big at that moment. And at that moment, it was the dawn of Twice mania, and everyone wanted to make that Twice money. Many companies in the 3rd gen had a very complacent attitude when it came to making their girl groups, and without a doubt, those who ran the company's post-IOI groups literally were asleep on the job. That's the only way I can convince myself any of this makes sense. They thought that they could just release whatever music, follow the trends of the big 3, all while having no consistency, because they believed that having 2 well-known members was enough, that they didn't even need to try. Then they debut a smaller subunit from the former IOI members in it to try and pick up the pieces. Yes, doing things that were adjacent to Twice was the cause of a lot of these girl groups' downfall, because people only wanted Twice themselves, not any other girl group. Twice was made with a lot of thought. Every member stands out in their own way, and with girl groups with bigger lineups, this is essential. When you only have 3 people who stand out in a whole group due to visuals or former survival show exposure, your group is going to fail. And to not even try to commit to these groups and literally let them fall apart when you realize you messed it all up, it angers me so much. All in all, Twice continue to be the main event even though the generations have changed, and that's so rare in K-pop and not a lot of people praise Twice for it. Literally the 3rd gen are on their last legs. They're on their deathbed right now, and Twice is still here with sales that are still increasing to this day. And you know what? I understand it all. Despite Twice releasing like 10 albums a year, they have longevity, and that's why every company wanted to make their own Twice.